Evolve or Perish. Chapter 16. Land, its ownership and use. The earth is owned by the human race. The whole earth is owned by the whole race. Large areas are occupied by peoples adjusted to them by long processes of evolution under local conditions. Beyond this, there is no such thing in nature as private ownership of land. Private ownership of land, either by nations or individuals, would be as great a perversion of natural rights as would be private ownership of the air or of sunshine. Efforts to maintain a private ownership of land is one of the causes of economic instability and of international discord. The human race is in possession of the earth and bears a responsibility for the proper and efficient use of it. The highest form of civilization cannot be attained or maintained without acceptance of the principle that all of the facilities and resources of the earth are the common possession of all of the peoples of the earth, and local residents are trustees for the community and the race. Possession of land is, under any circumstances, merely a mechanism to facilitate its utilization. Land is utilized for the purpose of maintenance of the race. To achieve this purpose, users of the land engage in barter of its products. This is the basis of both foreign and domestic trade. Everything that enters into use and into the channels of trade is the product of the land and the application of human effort to these products. A rational view of the use of land must take into consideration the rights and responsibilities of the individuals and communities occupying individual parcels and national areas, and the rights and responsibilities of individuals and communities with which they engage in barter, either directly or indirectly. No individual does or can live for himself alone. He has responsibilities to maintain himself and advance his development to the greatest possible extent, but he has equal responsibility to his community. He has no private rights that are isolated from equivalent community rights. This situation is inherent in the nature of the individual, the community, and the race as a whole. He has responsibilities to develop the facilities the earth affords, not only for his own benefit, but also for the benefit of the community, local and worldwide. Utilization of the forces and facilities of nature has made possible the development of our civilization. This civilization is a manifestation of the progressive development inherent in the nature of the individual and the race. Maintenance and advancement of this civilization is a responsibility of all members of the race. Maintenance and advancement of civilization requires the use of materials and facilities that have not been uniformly distributed by nature. These materials and facilities are the heritage of the entire race regardless of their location. The local residents in the areas in which these materials and facilities occur are the trustees of these resources for the entire race. The facilities of the land cannot be maintained as a private monopoly either by individual or nation, nor can they be used for private advantage against the larger interests of the community or race. This natural and inescapable principle forbids private ownership by individual, nation, or racial group of any portion of the earth. It requires that occupancy and use of the land be organized for the greatest welfare of the individual occupants, the community, and the race as a whole. This latter concept may justify the occupancy of the American continent by the white man, but nothing can justify the methods we use to achieve this end. The Indians were ruthlessly deprived of their lands and rights. Every piece of property in the United States is stolen property. We hold the same kind of title to the land here that Italy holds to the land in Ethiopia, and that Japan holds to Korea and other areas. Not an individual in the United States holds a clear title to a single foot of land. By a variety of devices, the land was seized and passed on to individuals and through them to present owners. The undeveloped land of the continent was practically valueless for productive purposes as it was taken from the Indians. Now high valuations are placed on it. The increase in value has been due entirely to the efforts that have been expended to change the wild land to cultivated areas. Full compensation for these efforts have been secured in the crop productivity that resulted. If all the cultivated land in the United States, and all of the improvements that we have made, roads, railroads, etc., were completely neglected for a period of 10 years, the whole country would return to almost the same state it was in before the white man came. The more fertile the land, the more quickly it would return to the jungle. The present high monetary value of the land would have vanished. All the efforts expended failed to produce in the land a permanent change that gave it a permanent basis for its high valuation. All the efforts expended failed to produce in the land a permanent change that gave it a permanent basis for its high valuation. The high valuations placed on the land have been wrongly placed. They should have been placed on the annual efforts of the farmers that maintained it each year against the ever-encroaching jungle and made it available for productive purposes. Any economic values that are produced come from the efforts expended and not from the land. We are guilty of a misplacement of credit when we place economic values on the land. The credit should go to the efforts of the farmer. Let us make an analogy to show the evils that can result from the misplacement of the credit for results produced. A roll of canvas is in an artist's supply store. John Joseph Rubens Velasquez da Vinci purchases for $1 a square yard of the canvas and paints on it a masterpiece which he sells for $10,000. The owner of the artist's supply store has a flair for finance. When William Smith Botticelli Rembrandt comes in for a square yard of the canvas, he finds that the cost has jumped to $9,500 a square yard, because Da Vinci had secured $10,000 for what he produced on the square yard he purchased. Rembrandt pays the $9,500 for the canvas and paints a picture which he sells for $10,000. Both artists produced works of equal value, but in the second case, due to the methods of finance capitalism with their usual way of misplacing credit, the artist got $500 for his work, and the financier who handled the canvas deal got $9,500. The methods of finance capitalism are no less crude than this in their operations throughout the whole economic system. Land values are built up in the same way. These land values are entirely fictitious, and recognition of them must be entirely eliminated. The evils of the present system of land evaluation are so great and so vicious that, in connection with related evils in the economic system, they are moving us rapidly toward the stage in which individual ownership of land will be abolished. Ownership of land is being shifted from the farmers to financial interests. The number of farms carrying mortgages is steadily and rapidly increasing, and the size of the mortgages is increasing still more rapidly, despite the fact that the average size of farms is decreasing, and their average value is going down still more rapidly. Due to the decreased return the farmer is receiving for his efforts, although the prices of land are rising. The number of owner-operators of farms is decreasing rapidly, and the number of tenant farmers is increasing. The eventual result, in the not very distant future, is to have the entire land area of the country held in ownership by the financial interests. This is a clear-cut parallel to the situation in the industrial field, where few small groups of financial interests completely dominate the country's productive facilities. It is not at all likely that our farm population will be pleased at the prospect of becoming economic slaves to a group of financial overlords. Yet that is exactly what will happen if the present system of private ownership of land continues. The very thing which financiers preach is the bulwark of our liberty. Private ownership of land is the thing that is going to cause us to lose our status of freemen and force us into the status of economic slaves. Private ownership of land must be replaced by a system in which continued and protected occupancy of land will be available, with no greater cost than that of sunlight and air, to those competent to use it for productive purposes. Under the present regime of private ownership, our possession of the land is, theoretically, protected by the state, but as an actual fact this protection does not exist, and the state functions as an agent of financial interests to take land away from owners, and it acts in a similar way on its own behalf. This is being done through foreclosures and tax sales to an extent that is increasing at an alarming rate through so-called prosperous periods, as well as in bad times. The methods by which the state functions as a legal thug in robbing owners of their property presents a clear case of conspiracy to steal. The fact that the robbery is carried out under statutory provisions does not alter the robbery aspect to any extent whatever. The thievery becomes very apparent as we examine the processes involved. A farm with a fair valuation of $10,000 carries a mortgage of $2,000. A depression, caused by the machinations of the capitalistic interests, brings a drop in farm product prices and the farmer operates at a loss. He is unable to pay the annual interest of $120. The mortgage is foreclosed. The farm is sold and bid in by the holder of the mortgage. The situation which prevented the owner from paying the interest installment of $120 prevented him from protecting his interests, at still greater costs, at the foreclosure sale. The situation was not of his making, but due to the activities of that element in the economic structure represented by the mortgage holder. The owner of the farm is forced to become a tenant and pay rent for the use of the farm he lost. Another bad year of low prices, and he is unable to pay rent and is evicted from the property. This is such common routine and of such frequent occurrence that we accept it as a matter of course. The injustice of it is recognized, but the procedure is so buttressed by laws that we have been taught to believe are just that we are unable to put our finger on the points at which the process ceases to be one of justice and becomes one of robbery. The procedure, however, is one of simple robbery and selective destruction of rights and equities in the interests of the moneylender. The state that permits and the court that directs such procedure is guilty of the vilest kind of conspiracy to steal property from its rightful owners. It is not the abstract state, nor the abstract court, that is here condemned, but the individual who is presiding as governor, and his fellow conspirators in the legislature, and the individual judge who sat on the bench and signed the papers, and the court officers who participated in executing the judge's orders. The guilt is personal, and the statutes in the law books, deficient in justice, offer no shield behind which the guilty individuals may hide. A consideration of the fundamentals in the case make the legalistic procedure seem archaic and perverse. In the first place, land cannot be pledged by an owner as securing for a loan, notwithstanding anything on any statute books to the contrary. No owners holds rights in land superior to the rights of the community. The owner in occupying and utilizing land does so not entirely as a private right, but as a private right granted as a means of fulfilling his responsibility to the community, to use the land for the benefit of the community as well as for his own benefit. Land cannot be pledged free of the community's rights and interests. Land, therefore, is not seizable as a pledge, unless specific provisions are made for the community's interests as well as the interests of the individuals involved. Second, no holder of a mortgage can be freed or isolated from the conditions which affect the owner and operator of a property. Both parties are subjected to risks and benefits. One cannot be forced to assume all the risks and the other all the benefits. If one is subjected to effects from the fluctuations of an economic situation, the other must also be subjected to the same effects. Land alone does not produce crops. The efforts of the farmers are the wealth-producing element. If the efforts are productive of a net return for his crops, the holder of the mortgage is entitled to receive from the farmer a percentage of this net return equivalent to the agreed payment on the mortgage. If the efforts of the farmer fail to produce a net return, the holder of the mortgage is not entitled to receive any more compensation than did the farmer. The holder of the mortgage is liable for a share of losses in proportion to his interest. Money is not entitled to special protection against the effects of economic fluctuations that is not afforded human efforts. But, nevertheless, it does receive under the law complete protections against loss, and it is protected at the expense of those who put forth personal effort. The property rights of one individual are protected at the expense of the personal rights of another, if we consider the mortgage holder's money and the farmer's efforts are the only elements involved. If we consider the farmer's investment in his farm and the moneylender's investment in his mortgage on the farm as property rights, then the property rights of the moneylender are protected at the expense of the farmer's property rights. This is contrary to every natural human right and principle. Any legal enactment which gives a superior right to money over human effort is a perversion of justice, and is totally ineffective as an instrument of justice, and is therefore null and void and totally inoperative in any legal system whose purpose is to dispense justice. The courts have, in the course of time, varied the liability for the mortgage loan from the land to the individual borrower as best suited the protection of the money. There has always been the differential distribution of protection. If the mortgage is considered a conveyance of property at the time it was made, the responsibility of the holder of the mortgage to assume liabilities involved in the use of the land become all the greater. Let us assume that by some magical process, beyond that which the law confers, that the mortgagee could be isolated in some economic vacuum. He could then be made immune to the universal economic conditions affecting the mortgager and all other members of the community. If such magical isolation could be achieved, then we could assume that he would be entitled to receive from the farmer mortgager the $120 interest on the mortgage which the farmer was unable to earn and did not possess. There was owed to the mortgagee the $2,000 principal and the $120 interest. He is entitled to receive the $2,120. Since a partitioning of interest is required, the farmer mortgager is entitled to receive his equity. The farm was valued at the time of mortgaging at $10,000. The farmer's equity of $8,000 is reduced by the interest debt to $7,880. If a partition of interests is arranged, it must in justice provide a full return on these equities. If for any reason a full return on both is not possible, the return that is obtained must be divided proportionately according to relative equities. This, however, is not done. Under the law, a sale is arranged to provide only the $2,120 equity of the mortgagee, while the $7,880 equity of the farmer mortgager is entirely dissipated. Theoretically, the farmer's interest is protected for a reasonable length of time after the sale, during which period he has the right to redeem the property for the amount for which it was sold, plus costs. Foreclosure of the mortgage, however, is an effective preventative that makes it impossible for the farmer to obtain an advantage from this theoretical protection. While the law states that the opportunity to redeem exists, it acts to take away the means for utilizing this opportunity by depriving the farmer of his property. The farmer was robbed, under statutory provisions, of $10,000 to satisfy a debt of $2,000. Any public official, or any court, from county court to United States Supreme Court, that permits such an operation is guilty of participation in simple robbery, unadulterated thievery, and economic piracy, notwithstanding any legal enactments. They share the guilt of the mortgagee. There is another viewpoint of the situation that should be considered. According to the rules by which financiers operate, a property is valued according to the profit it produces. When a property is producing a profit, its stock sells at a high price. When it fails to produce profits, its price drops to zero. This zero price, however, is disguised by a valuation placed on future possibilities, which is added to the zero price. The price of the stock drops to a minimum above zero, commensurate with assets and future possibilities. If the affairs of the concern are to be closed at the time it was operating at a loss, future possibilities are eliminated. Nothing remains but the physical assets which are sufficient to pay current bills. This leaves nothing for the stockholders. Their equities have been wiped out. These stockholders can be likened to mortgagees holding proportionate mortgages on the company's property. The farmer whose operations show a loss is in the same position as the industrial concern that has failed to operate profitably. The farm, failing to produce profits, fails to retain its status as a valuable property. Because it produces losses instead of profits, it drops to zero valuation, just as in the case of the stock of the industrial concern. The mortgage on the farm is to be foreclosed. The farm has future possibilities, but these cannot be brought into the present situation. The foreclosure was based on the existing situation of the present in which the farm failed to earn profits. If future valuations and profitable production possibilities are admitted and made part of the foreclosure situation, the foreclosure becomes unnecessary because the admitted future possibilities for profitable operation carry the assurance of protection of the loan. Since these future possibilities were not taken into consideration at the time the foreclosure action was started, they cannot be brought into the situation at the time of the sale to give the property more than a zero valuation. It is these future possibilities that comprise the values which the mortgagee takes for his equity. With the future possibilities eliminated, the farm stands as something devoid of monetary value as it is a producer of losses instead of profits. On the basis of this viewpoint, consistent with all of the dealing in the field of finance capitalism, the courts could rule that there is nothing of monetary value to sell, there remains no security for the loan, and the mortgage is therefore declared void and ordered vacated. This latter procedure is just as legal and fair as the present procedure. It is merely offered to show the miserable injustice of the present methods, and how, if the direction of the injustice is reversed, the robbery is directed at the moneylender instead of the farmer. If we accept the present procedure up to the point at which the mortgagee and the state perpetrate the act of robbery, we can make some changes which will alter the piratical results and inject a little justice. We can admit the right of the mortgagee to foreclose to obtain his loan of $2,000, but the property cannot be sold without carrying a mortgage of $8,000 representing the equity of the farmer. After the foreclosure sale, the moneylender and the farmer reverse their positions. The moneylender takes possession of the farm and the farmer becomes the mortgagee and is entitled to receive $480 a year in interest from the former moneylender, who must now get that amount out of the productivity of the farm. Any foreclosure sale which fails to give to the farmer mortgager a mortgage or its cash equivalent for his equity, based upon the valuations at the time the foreclosed mortgage was placed, as a minimum value, is merely a plot to rob the farmer. Any court, public official, individual moneylender, or corporation functioning in this capacity who has participated in any way in such robbery is subject to indictment for this crime, and the victim is entitled to recover his losses from the state. This is true despite any statements in bond or mortgage, or any permissive or mandatory legislative enactments, or any precedents or traditions based on them. The evils of the mortgage foreclosure situation are paralleled in the tax sale situation. Inability of the owner of a piece of property to pay his taxes causes the state or its subdivision to sell the property to secure the amount of the taxes. Such a situation usually precipitates a foreclosure action if the property is mortgaged. Recovery of the property is usually possible to the owner by payment of the taxes plus penalties and costs. Frequently, the tax title is purchased by racketeers who hold up the owner for fantastic sums. This situation is caused not by capitalistic racketeers, but by the state. Ownership of a $10,000 piece of property can be and frequently is jeopardized by the state because of its $200 tax interest. By taxing land to raise revenue, the state adopts a method under which it refuses to share in the fluctuations of the economic structure with its citizens. The citizen must produce a quota of money for the state in proportion to the money valuation placed on the land by the state. This amount must be paid regardless of the return the farmer receives for his effort. There is no relationship between the farmer's earning and his taxes when paid on the basis of land ownership. The only just tax is a tax on earnings. A government which receives its taxes on the basis of the citizens' earnings would be more solicitous about the citizens' earnings. Land is utilized by the farmer as a community responsibility. The net income which the farmer receives from his operations is a very small amount compared to his contribution of wealth to the economic circuit, and from which the whole community benefits. The community is entitled to receive these benefits in return for benefits which it makes available to the farmer in the form of manufactured goods, etc. If land is to be taxed, the tax should be imposed on the basis of the benefits received from it. This should be the basis of all taxation. Taxes are raised to compensate the government organization for the services it renders to the community. This is a useful and necessary service, and those who render it are entitled to a just compensation. The purpose of this service is to facilitate the operations of the economic and social structure. The benefits from these operations are in proportion to the earnings of the individuals. The only just basis for taxation is to make the assessments in proportion to individual earnings on a uniform scale. When such a just basis for taxation is adopted, land taxes are eliminated. The elimination of land taxes is but a part of the program of proper direction of land utilization. The inevitable basis for land utilization is common ownership of the land. Under common ownership of land, there will be protected occupancy of land, the protection to be real instead of theoretical as at present. No one will lose occupancy of land which they are competent to utilize, or which is their home site. No one who is competent to utilize land will be without land. The occupancy and use of land will be a right granted to competent individuals. This right is the complement of the responsibility to render a service to the community. No individual is free from this responsibility, except for such changes as are necessary or desirable to better serve the interests of the individuals or the community. The existing status of individuals will not be changed. Where an individual is located on productive land, which is neither too large nor too small for him, he will be continued indefinitely on that land, and family interest in a plot will be given full and primary consideration. There is more than ample good land available to provide all the agricultural products we can use. There is no necessity for bringing poorly adapted land under crop cultivation. The good land can be allotted to our competent farmers, providing each with a plot large enough to supply adequate crops to satisfy each individual's responsibility. Joint cultivation of adjacent plots will make possible the use of most efficient methods. Commonizing the ownership of land is not achieved by confiscation, but by purchase by the federal government. The method is simple. Existing titles will be recognized and payment will be made on a fair valuation. Assessed valuations or purchase prices may be the basis for such valuations. Payments will be made over a period of years. If spread over a 25-year period, payments of 4% of the valuations will be made each year. Spreading payments over a period of years will not work hardship on any recipients. They are continued in possession of the land and are receiving back their purchase price. It is a compensation for a change which costs them nothing but brings an avalanche of benefits. There are approximately 6 million farms in the United States. An average valuation of $5,000 each would give us a total valuation of $30 billion. This amount would have to be paid off in 25 installments at the rate of $1,200 million a year. Commonization of land would not be limited to farm properties, but will apply to city land and also industrial and mineral land. All realty in the United States had a total assessed valuation of $176,415,000,000 in 1922 and of $124,706,000,000 in 1932, according to data of the Bureau of Census. A vast amount of this land is held by corporations. The situation affecting corporations differs from that affecting individuals. The rate of payment to them would not have to be as high as that to individuals, since corporations need not be affected by the lifespan of individuals. An average rate of 3% on a valuation of $150 billion, which is midway between the high figure of 1922 and the low figure of 1932, would call for annual installment payments of $6 billion. The foregoing figures include vast amounts now held as mortgages by federal government agencies. These mortgages would not have to be paid off in the same manner as private debts, but would be handled in the public debt category. The federal government, in addition, has enormous holdings included in the above figures and for which payment would not have to be made. This also applies to land now held by states, counties, cities, etc. The annual payments could probably be reduced to $4 billion a year. This is a large amount, but it is not beyond the ability of the government to raise it by direct tax, in addition to the other taxes needed for the normal operations of the federal government, which do not exceed $2 billion a year. The amount raised by all governments, federal, state, county, city, etc., exceeds $11 billion a year. The $4 billion a year cost of commonizing the land in the United States is a much smaller amount than that which is diverted each year from the workers out of the gross income of corporations and plowed into the capital structure of these organizations. If the $4 billion were prorated, the average tax per family would be $160 per year. The benefits that would accrue to the members of the community would be far in excess of the tax cost of commonizing the land. The family living in a home carrying a $2,750 mortgage, on which they have paid interest each year without reducing their debt, would profit immediately to the extent of $165 a year, saved in interest payments, and the entire mortgage of $2,750 would be wiped out, as all mortgages are paid off as part of the commonizing plan. Persons living in apartment houses in cities would have the benefits of equivalent rent reductions. These would be only the smallest part of the benefits. More than $2 billion a year is paid out in interest on mortgages. About half this amount is paid as interest on mortgages on industrial property. This saving of interest on mortgages on industrial property can be applied directly to the reduction of cost of commodities, thus reducing the cost of living without any need for reducing wages. Elimination of land taxes and substitution of direct tax on earnings will make possible the elimination of the cost of land taxation, thus making the operation of local government units less costly. The greatest benefit will be in the form of security. It will be impossible for anyone to lose his home through any of the causes which now produce these catastrophes. The individual will have greater security in his home than is now possible under private ownership of land. Gambling in land values will be eliminated. Much of the distress among farmers has been due to the sale by land gamblers of land for crop purposes, which was entirely unsuitable for such use. Excessive values imposed on land in the cities is the cause of congestion in these centers. They are the cause of ghettos where people are forced to live under crowded conditions and in unsanitary surroundings. It is in these areas that diseases most frequently break out and spreads with great rapidity, and where crime and other antisocial activities are rampant. The excessive land values in the cities are the cause of the architectural monstrosities called the skyscrapers. The great height of the skyscraper is necessary in order to provide sufficient rentable floor space to bring in the high income made necessary by the high cost of the land on which the building is erected. Such buildings raise property valuations on plots near them, thus fostering the building of more such structures. High rentals are required to meet costs, and the amortization of the investment before the building goes out of style and loses its popularity. High rental and land costs increase the expenses of concerns doing business in the city, and these increased costs are passed on as parts of the costs of commodities paid by consumers. The reduction of rental costs and the elimination of land costs through commonization and by elimination of land taxes will result in further reductions in the costs of commodities, gained without need for reducing wages. The buying power of the worker's dollar is increased. The distribution of vast amounts of cash in the land commonization plan will greatly increase the purchasing power of the country, creating a great demand for goods, which in turn will create a demand for labor and thus eliminate unemployment. If commonization of land produced no other effect than this, the elimination of unemployment, it would be a worthy project. Its cost is no greater than present relief and dole projects, and it takes the unemployed out of the economic slave class. Land commonization would make possible the dropping of the government relief projects both in cities and agricultural centers, now costing the government some billions of dollars a year. Our relief projects are directed toward overcoming some of the effects of economic instability. Land commonization would eliminate one of the major causes of such instability. Under land commonization, we would have a happier, more stable, more productive nation. The money lenders would have to cease to ply their piratical operations. There would be no means for them to continue. There never was a moral or ethical justification for their money to earn money. Any legal sanction that has been extended to permit such an operation is part of an act of economic piracy. Piracy on the high seas has long since been outlawed. It is now time to eliminate it and all of its mechanisms from the economic structure. We will have a better world to live in when this is done.